And while everybody logs in, I'll just say, I'm not sure if secrets is the right word right now. It's maybe rumors, speculation, attacks, grumblings. I think that might be more appropriate.
Yeah, I actually was going to say that it's better described as confusing and ever changing.
That is extremely accurate, especially as taking into consideration what happened last week, which I'll be talking about a little bit here. And I think it added more confusion than clarity.
Well, they're perfectly consistent.
Consistently confusing. There you go.
Great adjectives, but I'm excited to learn more too. And what are all of the changes coming at us? So we'll give folks just a couple more minutes here. What time is it? It's 12:32. So we'll give them a couple more seconds, really. And then we'll get started.
And Brian, how's the weather like over where you're at today?
Probably the same as you. We're just on the opposite sides of the Beltway, basically.
It's hot.
Yeah, it's 95 maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Oh no, it's 90 right now.
But it feels like 95, if not warmer.
All right, we've got attendees coming in still, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So again, thank you everybody for registering and attending today for CMM Secrets Revealed, which it sounds like it's a little bit more about just learning, clarity for what's been a little bit confusing, and really excited to have Brian Chavis as well as Max Pruger with us today. So Brian is the IT strategy officer from Custom Information Services, which is an IT firm out of Texas and Virginia. And then Max, he is with Kaseya and the general manager for compliance, with a deep background in compliance. And Brian will talk a little bit more about our agenda and what all will be covered today.
Okay, thanks, Nicole. So this is going to be very basic. I'm going to do a 1-minute commercial on who we are. So, hopefully you'll get interested in maybe attending some of our other webinars. And then I'll turn it over to Max for a short presentation, and then we'll do questions at the end. Unless you have a really burning question, type it into the chat, and Nicole will keep an eye on that, right? Okay, so why does CIS do these webinars? We've been doing cybersecurity webinars for about a year now, at least once a month. We believe that cybersecurity is a duty for all businesses. We feel like we have to protect our businesses against foreign actors, and that business continuity is the #1 goal for any business. So we do these at no cost, and we actually have some follow-on services at no cost if you're interested. Nicole? So just to show our competencies, we are Overwatch certified, which means that we actually have a national group that watches our policies and procedures around cybersecurity. We're a cyber awareness champion with NCSA, and also we're a vetted tech stack technology provider. So moving on to what we're going to talk about today, like Nicole alluded to and Max alluded to, this rather than secrets revealed, we're really talking about something that's confusing and ever changing. In fact, it changed last week, and Max is going to talk about that. Max has been a pioneer in managed services industry since the late 1990s. He currently serves as the Senior Vice President and the General Manager of Compliance Manager, Volscan, My IT Process for Kaseya's market strategy for these business units. So, and if you don't know Kaseya, they're like a $3 billion company, I want to say, and leaders in cybersecurity software and network management software. So Max is a frequent international speaker on many different information security topics, including CMMC. So thanks, Max, and feel free to take the screen.
All right, fantastic. I will get fired by my CEO if I didn't clarify. Kaseya is about a $14 billion company today. Kaseya proper, which has grown through acquisition, but also organically. So I was one of the original employees. In fact, today is my anniversary, so it'll be 17 years, I think. But yeah, we were about a $4.5–5 billion organization. A couple months ago, we acquired another company that was about a $6.5 billion public company that we took private. That was Datto. So combined, we're about 11, 12, and we had pretty good quarter. So with that, we're probably closer in that $13 to $14 billion range. But we are a private company, and yeah, just make sure that in case my CEO watches this, I report directly to him. I want to make sure we're clear. All right. So yeah, if you can stop sharing, I will share mine, and let's. All right, here we go. If you could please validate that you can see my screen, and I'll just get started here.
Yep.
All right, fantastic. So I know we've talked about, whether it's rumors or accusations or confusion. So what I'm going to do as I get into this presentation, the first portion of it, and let's see, there you go. I'm going to stick with facts. So I'm going to talk about the history of DFARS, so the Defense Industrial Base, which is DIB and or DIB-CAC. I'm going to talk about CMMC 1.0 and really how the process itself got started, then CMMC 2.0, and then we'll move from facts to assumptions and assertions and hearsay and, honestly, my opinion about what happened last week. So, don't get freaked out. It was just there's a meeting every single month. It's a town hall. So the last town hall was last week, and there was some pretty good information. So there was some clarity, but then there was also additional information that has sparked some let's just say questions. So I'll go over that. And then finally, I'm going to end it with, what are the real requirements today? So, despite all the confusion, there are real requirements today for every DoD supply chain contractor that you must meet if you want to be eligible for any new contracts or to renew your existing contracts. And then with whatever time we have left over, happy to stay on, happy to answer whatever questions come up. So I will preface this with a couple of things. So one, this is going to be a little bit dense. So there's a lot of content here. And when it comes to 1.0 and even 2.0, I'm going to go through 1.0 and the history pretty quickly so we can get into where we are today. I will also throw out some disclaimers, and I will do it right when I start. And I will also do it when I get into the what happened last week section. CMMC is continuing to evolve. So, what I say today may not be the rules in the next month or two. And again, I'm going to make some predictions, which may or may not come true. So knock on wood, I've made historical predictions on CMMC that have been relatively accurate, but at the same time, again, this is subject to change. So I will throw that disclaimer out there. But let's start back in the day. So we're talking about the DFARS history. And as far as DFARS history goes, this all started in 2010. It was an executive order by the president at the time, Barack Obama. And effectively what he said was that there are a lot of DoD supply chain contractors. So the Defense Industrial Base has two pieces of information, or they have federal contract information and then what's called CUI, controlled unclassified information. And we as the DIB must do a better job of securing that information. So they passed a DFARS clause. It was 252-204-7012. If you have a DoD contract, open it up, do a control F for find or search, and look for 7012. And I'm fairly certain that the vast majority of your contracts will have that clause on it. So by 2017, roughly 87% of all DoD contracts had that clause in it. And what that clause says is that you are required to meet the 110 NIST 800-171 controls. Plus, by 12/31/2017, 72-hour incident response reporting. So if you have a breach or you have an incident and you learn about it, you have 72 hours to report that to whoever the governing body is for the contract that you have. And so again, by 2017, roughly 87% of those contractors had that in those contracts. The Department of Defense did an audit in 2019, so it was pretty much the end of 2019, and they had an over 90% failure rate. And this wasn't just the small contractors. They audited, from what I heard, 9 out of 10 prime contractors, not in any specific order, but contractors like Boeing and Raytheon and Lockheed and so on. And 9 out of 10 of those failed as well. And in fact, as more information comes out, I'm hearing that it was actually closer to a 99% failure rate. So the government came out with an interim rule in 2020, so kind of the beginning of 2020, and they said, hey, unfortunately, because we can't trust you to do a self-attestation, which is what the previous requirements were, you complied with those 110. Everybody checked the box when they got the contract and said, yes, I'm fully doing those 110 requirements, and therefore giving my contract. So they came out with the interim rule. So the interim rule was announced on September 29th of 2020. So it has been in effect for almost 2 years at this point. So again, it was announced, so it was effective as of 11/30/2020. It is defined by DFARS. It is based off of NIST 800-171 and those 110 controls that you were supposed to be following anyway. And it really was meant to be a security stopgap until CMMC was launched. And I probably should have started with this. If you're not familiar, CMMC stands for the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. And there's a reason that word certification is there. And of course, it's been 2 years, and there's still a lot of confusion among contractors on what exactly they have to do and who does it and when they do it, and what they do as a self-attestation versus getting certified and so on. So hopefully, as we go through this, I'll help clear up at least some of that confusion. So we're going to go into CMMC 1.0 and then 2.0. So CMMC 1.0. What it protects, and so does 2.0, are the two types of information classes that we have. So the first one, I'll actually go backwards here, is federal contract information. If you have a federal contract, congratulations, you have federal contract information. So that's the most basic type of information that we're trying to secure. The next one is what's called CUI, controlled unclassified information. So this is a higher level, this is really what the government is trying to protect. So there's different levels of CMMC, and what I'm going to do is talk about what you have to do if you have CUI. So when 1.0 was announced, what they said was that all DoD supply chain contractors, regardless of size, regardless of whether they have FCI or CUI, effectively, if you want a contract, you will have to get certified by a third-party certification body. Again, you can take this for whatever it's worth. This was just really made due to the disregard for all of the recurrent requirements. So like I said, everybody was supposed to be doing this, but when they did get audited, what they said they had, and like I said, what they actually had were two completely different things. And what they said is that, it's the government. They knew there's 300,000 DoD supply chain contractors. They know it's going to take a while. They actually have to certify with organizations first who can do the certification, and then those organizations will be independent and they'll certify the supply chain contractors. So originally they said that it's going to take about 5 years to roll out, and so they expected to have full implementation by 2025, fiscal year 26. And my original prediction was no way, but that's what they said. And as they said so far, I think I've been more accurate on my prediction than they have on theirs. So when 1.0 came out, there are 5 levels. Level 1 was for any organization that had FCI, so roughly 50 to 60% of the defense industrial base. And out of those 300,000, somewhere around 150 to 180,000 contractors would only have to do level 1. Level 2 and actually level 4, just transition levels. So nobody would have to get certified at 2 or 4. So it would be either 1, 3, or 5. Level 3 is for any organization that has CUI. Now, they originally said that most organizations would have to be level 1. My prediction was that the vast majority over time would actually have to be level 3. And initially, NIST 800-171, so if you're not familiar with NIST, it stands for the National Institute of Standards and Technologies. It is a government organization. They build these standards. 800-171 is a special publication, so it's actually SP 800-171, and it has 110 controls. So originally in CMMC 1.0, level 3 was the 110 NIST 800-171 controls plus 20 more. So if you notice, it's the same as the interim rule plus 20 additional controls. And then level 5 was for anyone, effectively it was anybody who had CUI that also had to deal with what was called advanced persistent threats. So APTs, it was based off of 176 controls. So it was the full 110 plus 66 more. And level 5 was really reserved for the prime contractors. So again, these are, you know, the Boeings and the Raytheons and so on of the world. It really was not meant, and it's still not meant for the smaller DoD supply chain contractors. Okay. And as I said, implementation through October 2025. And then September 2021 hit, so roughly a year ago, and there was lots of drama and chaos, and I won't go into all of the specific details, but some of the highlights is that the CMMC requirements were supposed to be finalized in May of 2021. They were not, and fast forward today, they're still not fully finalized yet either. CMC training was supposed to be in full swing by summer of 2021, and then, you know, December, hundreds of assessor organizations were anticipated to be, certified by the summer of 2021. They had 5, so they had expected over, I think, 200, and there were only 5 that were, accredited or certified, and even they were provisional assessors. And as of September of 2021, they had predicted they'd have several hundred companies already certified, and they had 0. So the DoD did not authorize any assessments as of September of 2021. And then there was some more drama and chaos. So from a cost perspective, they originally assumed that it would take roughly about $50,000 for an assessment and as well as remediation. And the assumption was based off of the fact that all DoD supply chain contractors were supposed to be doing the 110 controls anyway. And what they discovered was people were checking boxes and not doing anything or very little. And as part of that, once they started looking at actual cost, it came in closer to about $150,000 just for the assessment, and then another $100,000 for the remediation. And that was a very scary thing for the DoD, because they don't want supply chain contractors, smaller supply chain contractors, to do a cost benefit analysis and say it's not even worth it for us to sell our products and services to the DoD. And so they were afraid a lot of these organizations were just going to get out of the space completely. So they got so again, they announced CMMC 2.0. And then on a personal issue, there were scandals from the DoD. There were the CISO for CMMC was actually walked out of her office. Nobody knows exactly what happened, or I'll say publicly, no one knows exactly what happened. There were accusations of fraud and embezzlement and things like that. And so the CMMC AB, which is an accreditation body, had a big shakeup with their board members, and some folks left and so on. And because of all of that, and because of the significant delays, the DoD Inspector General got involved, and they started to investigate, those that were responsible for CMMC. So both the government, the DoD staff, as well as the CMMC AB, which is actually a third-party independent body. So it's they had to get accredited themselves, but like I said, lots of shakeup in that area. So due to all of those things, they announced CMMC 2.0 on November 4th of 2021. So roughly about a year ago, and they made some pretty significant changes. So to recap, with CMMC 1.0, there were 5 levels. Every single level required a third-party certification. So regardless of how small you were, whether you had 1 contract, whether you had 100 contracts, whether all you did was FCI or you had CUI, you had to get certified eventually by the CMMC AB. Level 1 still remains 17 controls, so 17 of the NIST 800, 171, 110. So that was level 1. Level 3 was the full 110 plus 20 more. And then level 5 was the 176 for the advanced persistent threats. And it was supposed to be in contracts by 2025. So that was 1.0. That's a quick recap. And as far as CMMC 2.0, what they did is they did try to simplify the process. So that was actually good. And part of that simplification was they went down to 3 levels. So that levels 2 and 4, which were transitional levels anyways, they just got rid of that and said, nobody needed to do those anyways. So we're just going to go to 3 levels. So level 1 pretty much stayed the same. It is 17 controls. It is the same 17 controls. But the big difference was that if you were level 1, you could just do a self-assessment. So they were not going to require a third-party certification. Level 2, effectively, I'd say mostly stayed the same. However, they got rid of the extra 20 controls. So it just follows NIST 800-171. So they dropped it from 130 controls down to the NIST 800-171 110 controls. And what they said is, depending on the organization and the contract, you can do self-assessments for level 2. It won't be for all organizations. Again, it'll depend on the contract itself, but they are allowing self-assessments today for level 2. And then as far as level 3 goes, for sensitive data and dealing with advanced persistent threats, what they said is that instead of following NIST 800-171's 110 controls, they would extend that to NIST 800-172. And not to go through all the details there, 172 is effectively the same as 171, but it deals with advanced persistent threats. And as of right now, for level 3, the government themselves, the DoD, DIBCAC, they are the ones who are performing those certifications. So they're really focusing on those level 3 prime contractors to get certified first, which makes sense, and the government is doing it themselves. And then as far as when will CMMC be fully in contracts, they left that up in the air. So I think they realized it's not happening by 2025. Now, it will be in certain contracts, but it won't be in every single contract, which was their initial goal. So more things. As I said, CMMC 1.0 was 800-171 and a subset of 800-172 controls. CMMC 1.0 had exclusive controls. It was DoD centric, and they had this whole new numbering system that they created. So even though they followed 171, they created a whole bunch of new numbers that you had to follow as well. So with CMMC 2.0, again, part of the simplification of the process is that it is 800-171, and it is still a subset. Yes, and it's still a subset of NIST 800-172 for level 3. Any changes to CMMC will no longer be their own subset of controls. So if they're going to change CMMC, if they're going to add additional controls, they're just going to change 800-171 or 800-172. And so that makes it easier for other organizations out there. There will be alignment with other agencies. So do not be surprised if this extends beyond just the DoD. And they came out with a simplified numbering system. So they're going to have the same hopefully numbering system as 800-171. In 1.0, as I mentioned, all DoD supply chain contractors had to be independently certified. I probably should mention this, it's a little later here, but C3PAOs, remember that name. So it's a certified third-party assessor organization. Those are the organizations that will get certified by the CMMC AB, and then they'll certify the third-party contractors. In the previous 1.0 version, you had to get a perfect score. So in order to get certified, you had to meet, assuming level 3, all 110 NIST 800-171 controls. It's also called practices. So all practices had to be implemented. And in order to get certified, you were not allowed what's called a POAM, a plan of action and milestones. And what a POAM is that you do a baseline, you do an audit of your environment, you see that you're missing 50 controls, you create a POAM with every single one of those missing controls, and then you identify when you're going to fix it, if it's budgeted. So there's certain requirements for the POAM. And that was not allowed. I will tell you, this was probably the biggest objection when CMMC 1.0 was announced, was the fact that they were not allowing POAM. So you had to get a perfect score to get certified. And if you had controls that were not met, then you couldn't get certified. So that was a big issue. So with 2.0, again, level 1, no longer have to get certified. It is a self-attestation. Level 2, most level 2 and all level 3 will still have to be independently certified, but you can do self-attestations for some of level 2. And then you can now have a minimum score. So you have to meet what's called the critical practices. So you have to implement those. And then you can have a POAM with firm deadlines that says, okay, I will meet these missing practice is within the next 3 to 4 months or 6 months, and then you have to show progress towards that. All right. Additional, as I said, 300,000 DoD, DIB contractors, 150 to 180,000 were level 1, 100,000 would have been level 3, and somewhere 10 to 20,000 would have been level 5. They all required third-party assessments through the CMMC AB. 300,000 DIB contractors still remain roughly for 2.0. So the first 150 to 180 will be able to do a level 1 self-assessment. Roughly 80 to 90,000 CMMC will do AB assessments. The other kind of 10 to 20,000 will be able to do their own self-assessments. And then for the final level 3, which was formerly level 5, as of today, the government themselves, the DoD themselves, DIBCAC, is going to do your assessment. So they're going to do it themselves. They're not letting the CMMC AB do it. All right. So when it comes to self-assessments, whether it's a level 1 or a level 2, if you can do a self-assessment, you have to do it annually. Once you've done the assessment, management must sign off on it. And when it says management, this is your CEO, this is your CFO. They must do a personal attestation that you have done the self-assessment and what you are turning in is accurate, and thorough. So that is specific. It's got to be accurate and thorough, and they're signing off on that themselves. It is subject to audit. So the DoD is auditing the scores that you are publishing in what's called the SPURS website, which I'll talk about in a second. The prime contractor is auditing it. And even if you do a self-attestation, and even though if it's valid for 1 year, at any point in time, both the DoD as well as your prime contractor can spot check you. So there is a continuous compliance requirement in CMMC. So once you do that self-attestation, you also have to maintain that compliance over the course of the year and effectively over the course of your entire contract. Because if you get spot checked, you must be able to provide updated evidence of compliance documentation to show that you're still complying with those 110 or 17 requirements or principles. And there are penalties, and they're pretty significant. So you can be penalized under the False Claims Act, which is triple damages. So if you get $1 million contract, and I'll talk a little bit more about the False Claims Act in a little bit, but you can get fined up to $3 million. If you have $1 million contract, you can be banned from future contracts, and you can also lose your existing contracts. So, this is not something you just want to sign off on and say, yep, this is good. Your executives need to review this because effectively they're going to be personally liable if what they claim they have and what they don't have are two different things. All right, independent assessments. So CMMC, there's an independent certification. So if you actually have to get certified, that goes back to the 1.0 days, you have to get certified with what's called a C3 PAO. So they will come in and they will do an independent certification. Once you're certified, that certification is valid for 3 years. Just like with the self-assessment, you are subject to audit. So if you think you're good and you don't have to do anything because you got your certification and you're good for 3 years, that is not accurate. At any point in time, the DoD, as well as your prime contractor, can request a spot check, and you must be able to provide evidence that you are maintaining compliance. And don't expect that you're going to get a spot check on a Friday and you can just do some stuff over the weekend and give them updated documentation on Monday. You must show over time that you are maintaining your compliance with those requirements. Again, same exact type of thing, whether you're do a self-attestation or whether you get certified, if you make false claims, there are penalties, damages, losing contracts and banned from future contracts. All right. So everything that I've said above, I will say is almost all completely accurate. Maybe somebody can nitpick a couple things, but for the most part, that's what we know today, and those are the requirements. So last week there was a town hall. I think they do a town hall. It's either the first or second Tuesday, I can't remember, at the end of every month. And so some of the town halls are pretty straightforward. They'll just answer some questions. They'll give updates. And then some of the town halls, they release a lot of new information. So what did we learn last week? So first, the CMMC accreditation body is now Cyber AB. And technically speaking, they renamed themselves to Cyber AB. So you can go to cyberab.org way before last week, but most people didn't realize it. And I just thought it was a good place to put this in. So so the CMMC AB is now, it's still an independent third-party body, but they are now called the Cyber AB. And if, like I said, if you go to cyberab.org, the information has all been ported over. In fact, if you go to cmmcab.org, I believe it just forwards to Cyber AB now as well. They have created a new course. So what the Cyber AB is responsible for is to get organizations certified. So that is they are the ones who will certify those C3 PAOs, certified third-party assessor organizations. They have a program which is a registered practitioner program, which they launched, and this was really for audit, I would say pre-assessors, IT professionals. It was just a basic 6-hour course. It was pretty straightforward. In my personal opinion, it was more of an ethics class versus a auditing class. So there were some attestations that you would be ethical, and they gave you a basic understanding of it. So they will be launching a new course in September, which is a registered practitioner advanced course. And from what I hear, that's definitely gonna be more in depth. So it's gonna be about 25 hours of training. And it's primarily gonna focus on CMMC 2.0 level 2. And as I said, I think that's where the vast majority of organizations will eventually have to end up. They announced an early adopter voluntary assessment program. And what that said is that if you wanted to get audited now, you could get audited now by a C3 PAO. And assuming you pass, you would not only be good for now, but it would be extended for 3 years after the rulemaking process is done. So they are still in the process of making all of the rules. They weren't very clear on exactly how you're going to do it, and I'm assuming you have to go through a C3 PAO in order to do this. But again, they announced this new program where you could get audited and effectively be good for now. And then once they came out with the final rulemaking process, it would start from that point on, and it would extend it for a full 3 years there. Personally, I'm not sure if I would jump on board with this immediately. There's still a lot of things that need to be flushed out. So they did announce finally that there are 16 certified third-party assessor organizations. They are on the CMMC, I'm sorry, the cyberab.org website, and they will be certifying more in September. So they are starting to ramp up their C3 PAOs. And finally, they released the long-awaited CMMC assessment process, which they call a CAP, which unfortunately, if you're in the healthcare space, there's a CAP, which is a corrective action plan. These are not the same thing. I don't know why they called it the same thing, I guess just to add more confusion, but there's the CMMC assessment process. It's a CAP. It's like 47 pages. My personal opinion, I started reading through this thing and I would rather watch paint dry. I think it's a lot more exciting, but it is there. It is a preliminary release of it. And they said repeatedly on the town hall that it is not official. It is subject to change. I am fairly confident it is going to change, but that they finally released it. So that's good. And I'll say it's kind of version, I wouldn't even say 1.0. It's kind of it's a beta version, 0.5, and there's going to be some updates to it. And as I said, all of this stuff right now is subject to change. This was just the announcements that they made. Obviously, the certified assessor, third-party assessors won't change. They already got 13 of those or 16 of those, and they'll add some more. I'm going to pivot a little bit and just kind of give you my opinion. There is a lot of noise. So there are message boards, and there's a lot of noise around the CAP. There are things in there that talk about scope and what's in scope and what's not in scope, and if organizations are going to have to get FedRAMP and things like that that are very onerous. And from a cost perspective, if everything that they say that's in scope actually happens, there's going to be some significant costs associated with this. So if you're a smaller contractor, if you're an IT provider, right now, what's in scope is that you may have to get FedRAMP certified. GCC high, things like that. So if you don't know what those are, don't worry about it, but there are significant costs with that. So I think there's going to be some pretty significant changes that are going to happen with the cap before the final rule is released. And I think it's going to simplify the process and lower the cost of the process. So again, this was just announced last week. So there's folks that are talking about it, but again, I think the cap's going to adjust. All right. So my timeline predictions for these things is that I don't expect CMMC to be fully in contracts for the next 4 to 6 years. So I think we're for those on this call, the vast majority of folks on this call, we're in the self-attestation phase for levels 1 and levels 2. And it's pretty easy. Just do the math. They need to certify between 500 and 1,000 assessors. They've got 16 so far. So if I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and assume they're going to accelerate this process, they're still going to take about 1 to 2 years just to get the C3 PAOs fully certified. From there, they're going to have to conduct somewhere around 40 to 90,000 level 2 assessments. And that doesn't even include the level 3, which the government's doing. And so if you do the math there, 40 to 90 assessments per assessor, and it takes about a group of 4, is going to take about 2 to 3 years to fully implement. So just adding those numbers up, you're looking at 5 years out. So my expectation, and again, this assumes that everything works perfectly and they have no additional delays and they actually release the final rule later this year. So again, I don't see CMMC being fully implemented for at least the next 4 to 6 years and potentially longer. So with that, back to what is actually required today. So back to facts. This is what is required today. If you're a DoD supply chain contractor, the interim rule is in effect today. It will eventually turn into the final rule, roughly by September is what they're saying now, but it doesn't matter because you have to do this today if you want to be eligible for new contracts or to renew your existing contracts. So when it comes to 800-171, you must do a self-assessment. So you got the current DFARS purchasing requirements for new contracts and contract renewal. So like I said, this is actually required today. You must do a self-assessment of the NIST 800-171, 110 controls practices, whatever you want to call it. The government, the DoD, released a scoring system. Not all practices are weighted evenly. So some of them are 5, some of them are 3, some of them are 1. If you don't have what's called an SSP, a system security plan, well, that's minus 110. So you got to at least have that one. But there's a weighted scoring system. And then once you have scored yourself using that weighted scoring system, you must post that score to a federal database called SPURS. It's the suppliers. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I have an image of it later here. So in order to be eligible for a new contract or renew an existing contract, you must have a score published into the SPURS website. And until CMMC is in your contracts, the interim rule is what you have to comply with. So when it comes to DFARS, again, look at your contracts. If it has a 252.204-7012 clause, then you are subject to the interim rule, you are subject to DFARS, and you must do your attestation. And by the way, if you want a new contract, look at the new contract language. Pretty certain, page 800 or 87 or 821, however big that contract is, you're going to have that clause in that contract. As far as CUI goes, there are a lot of things that CUI can be. So I'm not going to go through this whole list. You can look at it, but privacy information, law enforcement, intelligence information. So controlled unclassified information. Here's a sample, but this is definitely not an all-inclusive sample. The good news is that you don't have to decide if you have CUI or not. Your contract is going to tell you if you have CUI, and eventually when the DoD passes CMMC or becomes a final rule, they will have a CMMC level on the contract. And so if you want to bid for a contract that's level 3, you have to be level 3. If it's level 2, you have to be level 2, and pretty much everybody has to be level 1. So again, not going to go through all the details, just give you an idea. Here's the 14, they call them control families. There's 110 individual practices. Within those 110 individual practices, I believe there's 324 sub-objectives. So a practice may have multiple sub-objectives. You have to actually meet all of the objectives in order for the practice to be addressed. So I talked about enforcement, just to go over that again. the False Claims Act, as I said, this is big. This goes all the way back to the Civil War. In fact, it goes back to contractors would get in front of Abraham Lincoln and Congress and say, hey, we're going to deliver these nice fancy uniforms, and they're well stitched and they're nice quality, and they're going to last you through bad weather and everything else. And then they would deliver junk, stuff would fall apart. And so Congress passed the False Claims Act way back then. And as I said, you can lose your contracts. You can have a breach of contract lawsuits. You can be banned from future contracts. And again, there's monetary penalties up to 3 times whatever your contract value is. And if you're a DoD contractor, the fine is bad, but let's be honest, if you lose your existing contracts and then you're banned from future contracts, then effectively you're out of business unless you want to pivot outside of the DoD space. All right, a scoring process is pretty straightforward. A perfect score is 110. So you start at 110, and then for every control that you're missing, you have to subtract a specific number. And that number, again, is provided by the DoD, so it's weighted. So points deducted for any control that's not fully implemented. So for the most part, there's a couple exceptions. There's no partial credit. If the control is a control, you either meet it or you don't. I said deductions range from -1 to -5. No partial credit. And it is not only possible to have a negative score initially, but it's also very common. So as an example, I was talking to a company back in January. They scored themselves. I said, great, how'd you do? And they said, oh, we got an 80. And I said, oh, that's 80. That's pretty good. I don't usually see scores that high, especially for your initial assessment. How did you get there? And they said, well, we started at 110. We're missing 30 controls. We subtracted 30 from 110, and we got 80. And I said, yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. So we rescored them, and they went from an 80 to a -4. And unfortunately, they already published their score. So we helped them, or not we, but their IT provider helped them, and they're scrambling as fast as they can to get to that 80 because they can get audited. All right, and as a perfect assessment is 110. You have to create what's called an SSP, a system security plan. So it's required with your self-assessment. It provides your implementation details for each control, and it uses the same control codes referenced in NIST 800-171. There are 110 responses. So as part of your SSP, you have to respond to every single one of those controls. You also have to say whether it's implemented, planned to be implemented, or not applicable. So I'll go through that. So for each control not fully implemented, there's certain requirements. You got to identify the control number, state the weaknesses, describe the plan of action to implement it, and then provide milestones and dates. So this is your POAM, your plan of action milestones of when you're actually going to implement those things. And you must define this for every missing or incomplete control. And then finally, this is the SPURS website, it's a supplier performance risk system. Once you have your score, so you're supposed to have your score, your SSP, and your POAM. Those are the 3 documents that are required, but the score only gets published to this site. And that's pretty much it. So that's where we are today.
That's all?
That's it.
That's
Until
it?
next week.
Wow, that was a fire hose.
So I do apologize. Again, like I said, I warned you, it is a little bit dense, but at the end of the day, all just kind of recap with all the stuff that I talked about. What everybody on this call needs to do if you're a DoD supply chain contractor is the interim rule. You have to score your existing compliance with the 110 NIST 800-171 controls. You have to, you have to create what's called an SSP, you create a POAM, and then you publish that score. That's the main requirement today. And you do like a self-attestation with your executives, and they sign off on it, but that's part of that publishing of the score.
All right, so I guess the first thing I would wonder, I feel pretty good about getting up to speed now because, it was hit or miss for me on some of the aspects that you described in much better detail. So, and I recommend that to people out there, we are recording this. So if you want the recording to run back through it, let us know. But once you're sort of up to speed here, what's the best way to sign up for the updates? I mean, do you go directly to a website? Do you, what's the best way to do that? Just go to cyberab.org.
You can sign up for their newsletter. They do, like I said, they do a town hall every month. I think it's limited to about 1,000 people, and they have maxed out, but as long as you sign up, they will send you a link to the recording if you're not able to participate in it. but cyberab.org, that's where pretty much all the information is going to be.
Right. Okay, so I'm glad you kind of had this emphasis on small contractors because probably you in Maryland, I'm in Virginia, even Texas. There are a lot of small contractors, small business set-asides, minority set-asides, and a lot of times the small contractors have specific expertise needed, by the federal government. So how do the small contractors provide input into this? Who represents them? I mean, I'm sure that, all the big primes are at the table, but how are the small contractors represented?
So it's a great question. So again, the Cyber AB has a board of directors. I know several members that are on the board. Several of them are what's called MSPs, so IT organizations that support a lot of these small contractors. And they're the ones who are really looking out for the best interests of the small supply chain contractors and telling them, and this is where they actually got accurate information that said it's not $50,000. You may assume that's going to cost $50,000, but the cost is significantly greater because a lot of these small DoD supply chain contractors, they may not even be in the technology space. They create some sort of widget that goes onto Boeing's plane, and they don't have anything to do with that. So at the end of the day, unfortunately, it really is the large primes that are driving this. But, the DoD is well aware that a large portion of their, manufacturing base, the DIBCAC, are these small contractors. And so they're trying not to make it onerous. I mean, look, all they're really trying to do it, and you can look at it however you like, they're just trying to protect classified data, because historically, as the defense industrial base, we have not done a very good job of securing that data. And a lot of it has been exposed to nation state hackers, other organizations out there that should not have that information. So, it's a fine line. Security is not convenient. You hear that a lot. I don't want to do two-factor authentication because I got to log in twice. Well, yeah, security is not convenient. So you've got to make it easy and convenient enough where people are going to do it, but you also have to make it secure enough so that third parties do not have access to that data.
Right. So, we have a client that they provide patented composite materials to Boeing. And it's only like 20% of their business, right? And so, they're looking at this and just going, we may lose 20% of our business, So I'm sure there are a lot of companies out there like that are not just selling to DoD, but, DoD is buying their products. So how about other agencies? I mean, like some of the other defense agencies like Homeland, three-letter agencies, are any of those following this as well? Yeah.
So again, this will be my opinion. Everybody is going to follow this. And when I say everybody, it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen in 5 or 10 years, but it's not even going to be, defense contractors or, security organizations. As a side note, like for example, HIPAA. So if you're a organization that does healthcare, so whether you're covered under a business associate, HIPAA has been around since 1995-ish or so, and it was ignored for the most part because originally it was optional. We are now 26, 27 years later. And while the large practitioners, like the hospitals, are now complying with HIPAA or trying to do their best, there's still a lot of small practices that are not. So the rumors that I've heard is that eventually there will be a certification process for just about every industry that's out there. And so I would not be surprised if CMMC, and they've even said this, so CMMC will start extending to local and state governments, Homeland Security, any organization that works with the Coast Guard, things like that. And then they've even hinted at eventually HIPAA is going to have a certification process as well. If you handle credit cards, there will be a certification process. So PCI DSS. Again, not to take this off on a tangent too far, but UK is sort of, or the EU has led the way with GDPR. We don't have an equivalent of that in the United States yet, but it's coming. Right now, there's something in Congress called COPRA, which is the Consumer Online Privacy Rights Act, very similar to GDPR. Whether it passes or something else passes, something will pass. There is demand from the industry because in the US, every single state in the United States, including Puerto Rico and DC, have breach notification laws on the books. So if you're a larger organization, if you're an Amazon or a Salesforce, it's really hard to comply with 50 different state regulations. So, they're demanding a standardized, federal, national standard that they can comply with. So that's my long-winded answer. The short-winded answer is, my personal opinion, if this is going to go across the entire economy eventually, not happening today, maybe not even 10 years, but eventually self-attestations are going away and you're going to have to get certified by a third-party organization.
Yeah. So I have experience with GSA contracts. And so when I got started on it, it was all manual. And then the last contract I had was pretty well automated with the portals and updates and all those kinds of things. But it was a lot of work, And so did you say that the only thing they're posting is the score? Or do you have to upload, all of your documentation?
No, so the only thing that's posted to the SPURS website is the score. It's the score and the score only. You can have multiple scores. You can start off lower. You can then add a higher score. So you must have your score. You must have your SSP. And you must have your POAM in the event that you get audited or they request more information. But the only thing you post to the website is the score and the score only.
Okay.
Okay. Now, here's a little caveat, which they're not really talking about publicly, but those on the message boards we have discussed. You were supposed, as a DoD supply chain contractor, you were supposed to be doing a self-attestation that you were complying with the 110 NIST 800-171 controls as of 2017, potentially, if it was in your contract. So the question somebody brought up and was never really answered is, I have an existing contract from 2019. It's a 3-year contract. I said that I was fully complying with 110 controls because you have to do that in order to get the contract. I publish a score, and let's say my score is 20 out of 110. Well, now I have actually published on a public, government message board that I'm at a 20. So technically, am I in breach of contract for my 2020? I'll let the lawyers discuss that, but technically, you said you were doing something to get a contract. It's in the contract. Now you're publishing a score, and so if they do want to go back, I don't think they will. But the point being is, you can publish whatever score you want. Just be aware, if you have a contract and it's got the 7012 clause in it, which almost certainly it does, you did say that you were complying with those 110 NIST 800-171 controls.
Yeah, you may not know off the top of your head, but I was surprised that not all contracts had that 7012 clause in them.
Yeah, it's if the contract does not have CUI, it won't necessarily have it. The vast majority do. So like I said, it was over 87% had them by 2017. I think it's closer to 95% probably have that clause in it today. So it's rare. I don't know the exact requirements. I mean, again, if there's no CUI, it's supposed to be for any organization that has FCI, which is Federal Contract Information. And if you have a contract, you've got you got FCI. But again, depending on the contract, maybe if you're like painting the outside of a wall, they won't put that in there. But other than that, the vast majority of them will have that clause in it.
Right. And the way the federal contracts work anyway is that, they can send you a contract modification at any time and add it. So you might as well assume that you're going to have it, right?
Yeah. And to be clear, I don't expect the DoD to do most of this enforcement. The DoD is going to enforce it for the prime contractors, but the prime contractors are open to liability if their subcontractors aren't doing this. So, again, we're all familiar with how it works. You've got Boeing, and I just use them as an example, so nothing against Boeing, but you have Boeing or Raytheon or Lockheed or Northrop or any of those companies at the top, and then they've got subcontractors, and those subcontractors have subcontractors, and those ones have subcontractors, and it goes all the way down that list. And if you're 3 levels deep, and you're not complying, well, that rolls up, the liability rolls up through the prime contractor. And Boeing's not going to risk their $250 billion contract because someone 5 levels deep is not complying. So, they're going to be responsible, and I think they're going to take the onus upon themselves to ensure that, their subcontractors and those subcontractors and so on are all following those guidance.
Great. So are there any other questions out there? Any, I didn't see.
So let me add one other thing. While it's not difficult or complicated, it is specific. So my recommendation, don't try to do this yourself, especially if you're a smaller contractor. Focus on your core competency and then find somebody like Brian, whose core competency is to actually help you comply with these guidelines. It does take effort. Obviously, we help simplify the process as much as possible. There are, what's nice about compliance is that you're not reinventing the wheel. You're literally following the rules set by a third party. In this instance, it's the Department of Defense. But again, you've got to have the knowledge in order to do these things correctly. So, like I said, there's organizations out there, but again, seek help. It's the easiest and fastest way to do it. And like I said, there's fantastic organizations like yours, Brian, that that help DoD contractors do all of this with the least amount of effort and cost as possible.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as I've said, I'm open to talking to anybody, offline. If you have any questions or anything you want explained a little better, just let me know. Hey, Nicole, we're about time, right?
We are.
Sorry.
No, we are. I actually have a question, and can you guys see my screen with the thank you for
Yes,
we can.
Okay. So question on just a cost, and just because I've seen information on this come out in some areas, funding, like, is there ways to get for these smaller companies to get funding to get certified?
I can take that. So potentially, so yes, there is. They did announce certain support for organizations. The problem is that they had originally assumed that organizations were already doing NIST 800-171. So when they announced CMMC 1.0, they said, oh, you're already doing 800-171, which is 110 controls. So really, we're only asking you to do 20 more. And so they had allocated funds to help organizations just to do that 20 more.
Right.
Okay.
And then, of course, what happened was people weren't doing the full 100 and 110. And so the costs skyrocketed. And that's, as I mentioned, that was one of the biggest pivots to CMMC 2.0 is what I call it. So yes, there is. I don't have the specifics. It's different for every organization, but you can look into that. Unfortunately, though, it's not going to cover the full cost of these. So to your point, Brian, I think there are a lot of organizations that are going to do a cost benefit analysis, and that's why I said the DoD does not want supply chain contractors to leave their space. They want to continue working with them. They just want them to secure their data. And so I think there's going to be compromises made on both sides. So the DoD contractors are going to have to spend some money and actually secure their environments, which is not just for the DoD, but it's for themselves. It's data. You got to secure your data. You don't want to get hacked and attacked and crypto locked and ransomwared. And depending on what data you have, you don't want to expose that to cyber criminals. And of course, the government's going to have to come in and say, look, we can't force our small contractors to spend $150,000, $250,000 just to comply with these guidelines, because they're not going to recoup their costs there. So, again, they did a lot of that with CMMC 2.0. With this new cap, that's why I think they're going to have to address it, because they brought more requirements back into it.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Max. That was awesome.
Yeah, I appreciate it. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out as well. Happy to help. Otherwise, good luck, and change is coming soon.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.